I want to start off by talking about the fact that space is really underestimated. I don't think we realize just how important space is to our lives. Abby, thank you very much for your comment. When the bum is numb, the brain is numb. I'm going to pick up on that over the next few slides, and I'm going to talk about why it's so important to us. So I'm a zoologist originally. I'm getting a bit old now. I'm nearly 72, but I started out as a zoologist. I lived in the Amazon rainforest in the 70s. I'm fascinated by these things and how they're affected by space. So, rats. What have rats got to do with space? Well, believe it or not, the whole profession of psychology is all about rats. They're still doing it. They're still doing the research because the research is rats navigating in a maze in space. Gorillas, they have a smaller brain than the chimpanzee. Why? Because the chimpanzee is more active in space. Predatory sharks, they have a bigger brain than the sharks that just open their mouths and take in food. So we even call ourselves animate creatures. Does that ring a bell? Animation. We move when the bum is numb. How many people in the audience have gone somewhere and thought, what did I come here for? I walked upstairs to get something and I've forgotten why I came here. And then when we walk back to that space, we remember. The association of memory and space is phenomenal. That's why people with dementia often get lost. Taxi drivers, let's just talk about the research with taxi drivers. The woman who did it, Eleanor Maguire, discovered that taxi drivers have an enlarged part of the brain to do with space and memory. And interestingly, when they retired, that part of the brain shrank. Space is a remarkable thing. Just count those individual dominoes. Did you actually count them? Or did you just automatically look at them and you added them up without counting? I don't think many people in the room actually went 1, 2, 3, 4. Why? The spatial configuration, hugely important in learning, and especially for children. So, interestingly, we get labeled. I'm a professor. Oh, he's an academic. Actually, I only worked in the university part-time for many years because I ran my own business. And I've worked with corporate clients, government departments, training diplomats and ambassadors, with people here in Mumbai. And I learned the trade by teaching, by helping people to learn. And I would ask you all in this audience, do you really know how people learn? Because it takes a lifetime to answer that question. These are some of the books that I've read, and I mean read them, and understood them. And they're all about space and spatial cognition and organizational ecologies and the way classrooms are designed and the way people get lost in the world out there. And these two are especially for you, Abby. There we are. We have a lot to do. If we really want to know how people learn, we have a lot to do. It's not easy. I love the title of this book. Teaching with your mouth shut. It's actually a bit extreme. It's a bit like saying to a presenter, see if you can do it with your mouth shut. So I've only got one prop. Well, actually two. And they're two pieces of string. And they're here. Now, you won't be able to see unless you're sitting in the business class seats at the front. But this one piece of string is different from this piece of string. This piece of string is how most people think that we speak. But actually, when you listen closely, you'll realize that this piece of string is like the one in the picture. It's got knots in it. And those knots are spatial words, what we call spatial metaphors. What are they there for? What do they sound like? Let me give you an idea. How many parents have said to their children, you have your whole life in front of you. You need to put that behind you. I work in higher education. I work in further education. Those people seem quite close. And you can go on, and you can go on. And these special words, the knots in the string, are there to help the brain understand. They're there to help adults and children understand. So let me take that a bit further. I'm really keen on the notion of not just writing objectives for learning, but actually understanding the art and science, the art especially that I call choreography. And this choreographer actually wrote this. It's in the Harry Potter studios in London. And I took a picture because it actually is at the heart of many of the problems that we face in teaching. This, by the way, is my daughter. You'll see my daughter again in a minute when she was a little baby. This is my daughter on platform 9 3/4 going through the wall. I would strongly recommend you go to the Harry Potter studios. It is fabulous. What a place to learn. What starts off as words on a page, or, by the way, words that we speak, becomes the images that we conjure up. So when you teach the children, when you teach adults, everybody's imagining. Everybody's imagining what you're saying. And you don't know, I don't know what you're all thinking. You might be thinking about what's for lunch. It's your private world. But in the private world of those children, they are imagining, whether you like it or not. How many people have you heard say, I read the book, and then when I went to see the film at the cinema, Hagrid was not like I imagined. Yeah? Yeah, not like I imagined. So we have a classroom full of kids, we have a classroom full of higher education students who are full of the errors of imagination. Why? Because we need to teach less with this language that we think is fabulous, but in fact has tremendous weaknesses because it's linear. So, this is the problem. The problem of the errors of imagination. So how do we avoid them? Well, I'll show you. If you want to read more about this, there are some fabulous books on it. Conceptual metaphor theory. Our language is full of metaphors, full of knots. Listen to yourself and listen how many times you say bodily or spatial metaphors. So talking of space and the design of learning, this is the new kid on the block. If you look at my latest book, you'll see there's about 14, 15 books with the word design on that have come out recently. Learning design. Yeah, learning design is the big new thing. So I'm really keen on encouraging people, and Prakash mentioned this, collaborate, design teaching in a collaborative way, using big space and using maps. And every session, every curriculum has a beginning and a middle and an end. And that's a brilliant start point in your design, because every one of those zones will require the relationship to change, and the way we deal with knowledge and our bodies and so on all changes in those different zones. Now, something that I've done recently is looked at the famous London Underground map and asked myself, why is it all over the world? So whenever I travel, I see it. In China, in Hong Kong, in Alaska, you name it, anywhere. And why? And the answer is, brilliantly, it's a lie. It's color-coded, it's straight-lined, and it removes all the detail that's on the left. Imagine people arriving in London, and they had to navigate their way around London. Simplified, lowering reality. And that in itself is something that is important in education. And what it triggered in me was, do you know, I noticed that the students don't know where they're going. They don't know where they've been. They walk into a lesson and think, yeah, what did we do last week? I can't remember. Some of them can't even remember what subject they're in. Yeah, so why don't we give them a map? So I've invented, this is actually a map of the staff development program for higher education lecturers at the Education University of Hong Kong, where I'm a visiting professor. This was the day that they had. This was the map they were given. And every time with my students in lectures and seminars, I move that icon. You are here. How many maps do you see? You are here. You are here. Why? It helps you to locate where you are in your journey. And everything has a beginning, everything has a middle, everything has an end. So I'm suggesting that you don't just use big maps for your design, but you simplify them, like the London Underground map, for your students to navigate the whole of the semester or the whole of the year. So they know where they're going, they've got a map. You can make it interesting, you can put icons on it, you can do all sorts of things, but give them a map. Yeah, fascinating. Look at this picture. Who's the teacher? Who's doing the work here? So some women in Malaysia once said to me, I asked them to watch me over 3 days. And at the end of it, they said, you don't seem to do very much. You don't seem to do very much. That's the secret. Let the learners do the learning. Let the learners do the learning is my strapline. If you email me, that's the first thing you'll read in my signature. Let the learners do the learning. So the teacher here is not doing anything. Actually, the hard work is in the design and the preparation of that delivery with the resources, the ideas, the choreography of the experience, the design of the beginning, the middle, and end is all about experiential learning. So let me just tell you what happens in the very first session in the class, in the masterclasses that I deliver all over the world. So when children come to school, when students go to university, by the end of week 1, they are bored to tears hearing everybody introduce themselves. My name's Professor Colin Beard. Oh. So one of the things I start off with is say, well, what could we do differently if we let the learners do it? And the answer is, let the learners ask you questions about what they want to know. So we start off like that. Every table, you can ask me 2 questions. And then I say to them, let me give you some advice. If you ask me boring questions, what are you going to get? Boring answers. If you ask me interesting questions, yeah? And then with the students in the university, I do 15 seconds of fame. And I leave them to it, and they produce a video. Each student's got 15 seconds to say something about themselves. But what they don't realize is I watch that time and time again so that next week I know their names. I know that they're in the British mountain climbing team. I know that they love swimming. I know that they, Yep. So have a look at this quotation. And if you forget, I say to the students, there's a fabulous relationship between learning and forgetting. If there's one thing you remember at the end of my session, this quote is really important. And in my next book for lecturers, the question is, that follows this, is this what you do in your teaching? Because this is what the brain alone is devoted to. And look how I've highlighted, especially for you, spatial understanding and movement. Abby, that's especially for you. Yeah, if the bum is numb, the brain is numb. If the brain is devoted to those things, and I would ask you as teachers or educationalists or whatever you call yourselves, do you really take this into account? Because this is what this amazing thing is devoted to. I'm going to suggest that some of the answer to how do people learn, we actually have 7 incredible capacities to learn. And we need to accommodate them all, embrace them all. If we're going to say that we do holistic teaching, no, we don't. We still think it's all in the brain, and it's not. There is no way it's all about the brain. The senses are so important because if you think about it, the only way into your children, the only way in to anybody is through the senses. Yeah. And I'm sure you've read the Nobel-winning, prize-winning work about fast thinking, slow thinking, and the fact that fast thinking is the emotional response that comes next. And then we have the slow cognitive processing. And we learn by doing things, and we do them with our hands. These are remarkable, remarkable things. And you'll see in some of the slides that actually what's going on in many of the slides is not just movement, but manipulation of objects with the hands. Those 3 at the bottom are harder, but I've noticed universities and schools are increasingly talking about creating the sense of belonging. And I think the slides that Prakash showed actually emphasize the sense of belonging, of relationships. Now, that previous slide, if I just talk about that, you'll forget it. And this gentleman here is taking a picture, so he's got it, he's captured it. Oops, he's captured it. Capture is really important. Getting students to produce things and then capturing it, as you'll see in a minute, is really important. Let them take photographs of their work and other people's work. But the best way to learn this model is this way. Walk it, talk it, use your senses, use numbers, use rope, explain it. And you notice that in this picture, there's at least 2 people taking photographs to remember it. Now, all of those 7 capacities, if I could just ask you to try something, if you've got a bottle in front of you instead of a glass, or if you've got a glass, try it. Would you please just pick up the bottle like this? If you've got a glass, with your fingers on the top like this, pick it up. Just pick it up. And I'd ask you this. What are you experiencing? What does it feel like? What do your senses tell you? Well, actually, what your senses don't do is they don't tell you that this little finger feels this, and this finger feels this, and this finger. Actually, the brain integrates everything to create a feeling of roundness. And that's exactly what happens with that model. All of that is integrated. To think that it's just the brain is to miss the point of learning. Humans have got incredible capacities. So that's the 7. And the best way to learn it is to use your body, to walk it, to talk it, to sense it, and so on. All of the 7 are combined. They're integrated. It's an integrated experience. So this is my daughter. Let's wind back. She's 16 now. Watch my daughter. Watch very carefully. This is the essence of the way children learn about their world. What's she doing? Watch carefully. What's she doing? Isn't that amazing? She's stolen her brother's phone, and at that age, she's pressing the blue button with her fingers. She's manipulating it with her hands. We've been through a phase when we were told it wasn't good for children to use their fingers to learn maths. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. And Piaget got it wrong, because Piaget said the sensory motor phase only lasts in young children, like my daughter when she was a baby. No. What do you think the adult's doing on the right? Imagine what your world will be like if you've got no hands. When you get up in the morning, how are you going to clean your teeth? How are you going to pick the glass up? How are you going to drive yourself to work? Please don't underestimate the body. So, why is space important? Well, the body moves through space, and this is what happens with parents who are teaching themselves the very basics of maths, or teaching their children. They hold the child's hand and they walk up the steps. How many of you have either experienced this with your parents, or you do it as parents, and we go, 1, 2, I can't go higher because I've got no steps, 2, 3, and actually the parents think that they're teaching by rote, that if I keep doing it, the children will get it right. 2, what comes next? And the child goes, 3. But what they don't realize, this is a spatial concept. So the children learn that 2 is down there and 6 is up there. But how do they do it? They do it with their body on concrete objects, in this case called stairs. So my wife's a primary school teacher, and she has a box of these. I keep pinching some of the things that she uses in primary school teaching. But this use of blocks is just the same. They're called manipulatives in maths. It's using the hands, using the body, using the senses, using color, and actually the language changes for the children. So she tells me this is what goes on. The children start out with sharing, and they might share sweets. Sweets are the concrete objects, moved in space to understand maths. But then the teacher starts to introduce sharing is division. And eventually, we learn the symbol. And my wife actually tells the children, line, 1 for you and 1 for them. What a brilliant association for the children to remember the symbol of division. So it moves from the body to just the cognitive process. And this is exactly what happens, I can tell you, in higher education with the good teachers. I don't think I need to say anything about those slides. My son brought that home on the left from his A-level psychology, and he built a brain. These are people in Singapore a few weeks ago. And they're actually using this process of word weaving that I've generated. And they have a series of words and they move them around and create sentences. But if you think about it, what have I done? I've broken it down. And these teachers, facilitators, lecturers actually build it up. So this process of breaking things down, letting the learners put it together, like a jigsaw, is another important concept. These are just some of the books in my study at home, academic books. So look at this. Now, you probably wouldn't really know what's going on here. The toothbrush on the left, throw it away when you're done. The whole thing, what a waste. So I used to lecture about the environment and sustainability. But you see that the toothbrush is being redesigned. These are manual ones, not electric ones, but the principles are interesting. And it's not until you look at the spatial patterns that you can move to a conceptual basis here. Let's have a look at it. I'll give you a clue, what we call a navigational clue for the brain. Here we go. A spatial clue. Just talk to your neighbor. Tell me what's going on. What can you see? Talk to your neighbor. Go on, have a little chat. Break the lecture up. What can you see? Okay, this is what you can see, hopefully. In the redesign of the toothbrush, these are the things that hopefully you won't throw away, the handles. These are the things that wear out and get thrown away. And if we look, in the design, they're gradually getting smaller and smaller. And if they're made of natural materials, they will biodegrade. And there's a session I do that creates incredible thinking beyond what you can teach, because people see patterns that you as the teacher can't see. This is what we call cognitive scaffolding. And you can find some of those scaffolding ideas in your language in the spatial metaphors. Yeah, you think that teaching is easy. I can tell you it's not, and I admire every one of you who's involved in teaching. It's hard work. My wife's a teacher, my father was a teacher, my uncle was a teacher. My father actually had a place at Oxford. He didn't go, he went to Nottingham instead. And when he was behind me, when he passed away, he was in a coffin. I told this story that I think I got from my mother, which was he went to Nottingham because this is romantic, this is where you get the violin out. My mum said that they met in Nottingham. So I always assumed that actually he went to Nottingham University because he met my mum. After the funeral, a Chelsea footballer came up to me and said, "You've got that story wrong about your dad. He didn't go to Oxford. He went to Nottingham because he was playing professional football for Nottingham Forest." Isn't it amazing? Your father's passed away, and a member of the audience actually tells you something about your father's history that you didn't know. So, spatial signaling, helping people to learn, giving them signals. And you can turn up, let's say you can turn up those signals to help them. So whilst you're teaching with your mouth shut and you're helping them, you can also turn up the amount of support, what we call the cognitive scaffolding. And if you want to check whether these children have actually understood, we can get involved in what we call making thinking visible. Let me give you some linguistic examples. Talk me through the steps. Show me the steps of your thinking is a way of getting them to make visible their thinking. So we've moved from post-it labels, and with the technology, by the way, the bottom left is the war room, where they used to move things with long handles so we could see where the ships were, where the army was. And we're seeing big technology, but this is an interesting future. I've switched the sound off, just if you watch it for a minute. You see the bodies being used? See movement in space is the future. And actually your laptop is limited. That's why during COVID, our students said, we want the real thing. Because actually small spaces don't work. And you're not dealing with the 7 capacities. You've got an over-focus on a limited set of capacities. This is the future. The body comes back to work in partnership with the brain. Very, very exciting. So when I was invited here, I decided to look up a bill. Now, if you look, I work for Sheffield Hallam University. I'll just try the technology. This is a bill I sent to the Facilities and Estates Department. So even though I was getting a salary, I charged them £1,000 in 2010 for working with architects, with IT specialists, with teachers, and so on. They'd had some consultants in, and really they didn't do very well in terms of the question, what does the future of our classrooms look like? And I'm just going to tell you what happened. There's all the architects. There's all the academics. These are the librarians. These are the IT guys. And they're all sat together, and they all speak a different language. So I remember at this point, I'd switched the system on, and in many universities and classrooms, you have a screen that comes down. Screen comes down. So I said to the architect, would you just come to the front and write your name on the whiteboard? Where do you think the whiteboard was? It was behind the screen. The only whiteboard in the room was behind the screen. You had to switch the whole thing off or press screen up in order to write something. So I then turned around to the whole room and said, what's on that wall? And they looked at the wall and they said, 6 coat hangers. Next question. Have you ever seen a student hang their coats on there? No. So why don't we put some whiteboards on there? And why don't we have some whiteboards on there? And now we're experimenting with glass. And the reason for all of this, including that £1,000 payment in 2010, was I took the trouble to develop the relationship with the estates and facilities directors of my university. Unless we understand the different tribes and the different ways of speaking, we're going to struggle to move forward. Yeah? So we need to make sure everybody's involved. I think, Prakash, you said that. Everybody's involved. We're all connected, and we all speak a different language, and we've got to do our best to speak to each other and develop the ability to work together. So, spatial ecology. A quick run through some slides in terms of what does this spatial ecology look like? I think there'll be plenty of images that show this. We have these classic photos of kids in Victorian times, and then we show the picture of the kids in the primary school at the top. And these kids are my students this last year. Let's have a closer look. See, the technology is mobile. See, they're using the whiteboard at the back of the room, but the facilities haven't quite got it right because there's a blank wall on the left, so they're all squashed up at the back when they could be spread out. We have to know about teaching. We have to know about learning. We have to know more. We've got more to learn. But look at the way they're using their hands, their bodies, their sensory systems. They're capturing things. They're taking photographs. They're sharing. They're collaborating. And imagine if we didn't have those whiteboards and it was stuck behind the screen. So yeah, let's just revisit this picture. Building something, what we call construction again, that I mentioned earlier on. And then I do this thing where I assess them. So the one woman on the left is from Malaysia. The woman on the right is from a UK university. We're all in Singapore, and they have a little test. I give them one of these pieces of string that you've just seen, and they have to replicate the model. This is kind of making learning visible. This is experiential assessment. Do we really need to give them an exam? Or can we use an experiential approach to see whether they've actually captured the essence of what we're not so much trying to tell them, but trying to give them an experience of? Don't call experiential learning learning by doing. As you've seen from the model, it's more than that. Don't call experiential learning active learning. What do you mean by that? Physically active? Is this experiential learning? You know, it's not that. It's actually designing an experience. And most people in the room, I can guarantee, if I have a conversation with you now, about what do we mean by an experience, you will struggle, like the great philosophers of the East and the West, actually to describe what do we mean by experience, even though we live in the experience economy. Everybody's talking about the hotel experience, the leisure experience, the in-flight experience, the whiskey tasting experience. Everything is an experience, but nobody knows what we mean by an experience. Taiwan, working with AIG. Look at this. They're in a room like this, so they use the walls, they use the floors. We improvise. Look at the body. Look at the body language. Look at the explanations going on. This is here in India, in Mumbai, with Bharat Petroleum. Look at the way that space is used for just a piece of string. Mobility, flexibility. You notice in Prakash with his pictures, some of the pictures, just putting wheels on things. This is Turku Polytechnic many years ago on the right. Everything's got wheels. Glass. As soon as I said glass, facilities said, big intake of breath. Can't do glass. Dangerous. Glass. We've got lots of glass. Whiteboards now. They last longer than, they don't deteriorate, but you do get reflection. Top left, hammock lecture theatre. A hammock lecture theatre. That's 15 years ago in Turku Polytechnic in Finland. 15, this picture's 15 plus years old. Don't be afraid to experiment. So these are some of the things I've published in the Royal Society of Arts, in books, and so on. The essence is really about this dynamic at the top. Don't worry about the yurts at the bottom and the beanbag type straw bales. It's about the relationship between form and function. The dynamic between what we do to teach and how we design around it. You can see that this is a while ago because we experimented with corridor fast food computers, the big atria. A lot of higher education institutions, a bit like a hotel, they've got a big atrium. Bottom left, top right, in India. Top left, Hong Kong. Middle, Shenzhen. The three big comfy sofa seats there, Taiwan. This is a session called Coffee and Papers, where I find special time and places for people to read. And I noticed that Prakash showed a picture of a girl on what looked like a bed, and she was reading. This is exactly what's going on with this picture here with a professor in London. And I found that my Coffee and Papers session, we complain about students not reading. Guess what? Corporate clients, chief executives of all sorts of organizations say to me, Colin, I absolutely love that session. You gave us permission to read for 30 minutes, and it was just beautiful. And they've got coffee and croissants, they've got their feet up. The pleasure of learning is something we never really think about. The pleasure of reading. And reading with our children at night when they've had a bath and they've had their hair washed. All these things is about finding pleasure in learning. This is in the Regency Hyatt Hotel in Mumbai as well. Look at this. Shoes off, feet up on the sofa, enjoying reading. So I'm going to just finish with a few thoughts. A couple of slides left. Anybody know what this is on the right? You'd probably, you'd have to guess. How many people think it's a football stadium? It looks a bit like a football stadium. Do you know what it is? It's the British Spy Centre, GCHQ. And that circle is actually the street. They call it the street. And their anti-terrorism response times now have been reduced considerably because of this street. You know, we have this language in English called, what's the news on the street? That's exactly what's happening here. So let me take you back to my drawing that I did when I was 16 of Charles Darwin, one of my heroes. I did that in pencil. It's not easy. So what's the connection with Charles Darwin? Well, they think that he created the theory of evolution because he had a sandwalk made in the grounds of his property. And the sandwalk was circular, and he would walk round this sandwalk and think. Let's wind the clock back even further. Aristotle and the schools, and walking and talking and questioning the pupils. Isn't it interesting? We go all the way back to philosophers, and we come all the way forward to anti-terrorist spy centers in Britain, and we see that walking, talking, sharing is a phenomena that is, yeah. So I think this might be the last slide, other than the kind of one just showing you a little film you can access. But this is E.C. Harris in London, a specialist in architecture. I got introduced to them, and if you know them, then you can go in their property, but you can only go so far. So the bottom layer is anybody. The next layer is friends of E.C. Harris. You can go there if you're in London, and they'll give you an office and so on and so on. But the top layer is for staff. Now imagine if you had that replicated all over the city. You would have an amazing elastic organization, a spatial ecology of sharing space. And I just find that quite a fascinating notion. The spatial ecology beyond the institution, connecting with others. These are my masterclass pictures, actually, I forgot. And this is me running a masterclass on a roof in Pune. So we can do without special spaces, but we don't need to. So I'm done. Thank you.